Welcome, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Files and Emails 2017 Main Breach Targets. I'm Shay Mann, and I will be your moderator. Today's webinar is in listen-only mode. If you have any questions throughout the event, please submit them in the Q&A panel, and we will answer them during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. This session will be recorded, and we'll email you a link to the recorded version tomorrow. I'd like to start and briefly introduce our speakers that we have today. First up, we have Paul Truelove, Vice President of Product Management at SailPoint. Paul leads product strategy and is responsible for setting the vision for SailPoint's market-leading identity and access management products. He leads the product team to success by understanding clients' critical needs today and anticipating the issues they'll face tomorrow, and then making sure SailPoint's products address both. Next, we've got Josh Bovee, Global Identity and Access Management Leader at Cargill. Josh establishes and monitors the global strategy, leadership, and direction for identity and access management activities for the Cargill enterprise. He is responsible for the development and execution of Cargill's IAM strategies in the areas of directories, access and authorization systems, and identity management systems. And last but not least, we've got Paul Gherkin, Global Identity and Access Management Advisor at Cargill. Paul provides the strategy, planning, and architecture around identity and access management activities for the Cargill enterprise. His focus includes leadership of Cargill's unstructured data access governance, privileged access management, directory authentication and authorization, and identity federation initiatives. And with that, we've got a lot to cover today, so let's get started. I will pass it over to Paul Truelove to kick us off.
Thank you, Shay, and I'm excited to be presenting today with the IAM team from Cargill. They've been a longtime SailPoint customer and have done a lot of very exciting things with our solutions. So as we sit here in 2017, we return to a very familiar theme over the past few years. Unfortunately, the enterprise is still under attack. It used to be that network security was all we needed to protect our perimeter. Employees would come into our offices, they would access the network, they would do their jobs, and that was it in most cases. However, today, intruders have either come in, inside the physical location, meaning insiders have access to information and they're the cause of our breaches, or they tend to still come from hacks from the outside. But as both of these populations become more creative, unfortunately, network security technology isn't enough to continue to stymie the challenges. So as the targets have begun to shift, now the most common attack vector is us. People. In addition, the attack surface has grown exponentially, right? It's no longer just data kept in nice, neat databases and applications. It's data that's located all over the enterprise, in the data center, but now even outside of the data center in cloud applications and storage repositories. It's also being stored in files, not just in applications. And so when you think about, collaboration portals such as SharePoint, files attached to emails, and all the information that's now being uploaded to the cloud, you can see that the exposure of the enterprise from a data risk perspective has increased significantly. Times have changed, and so must our approach. Another important factor is the increased interconnectivity between people, both inside and outside of our organization. We've created a world where it's no longer, we're no longer in a situation where only people inside of the organization collaborate on sensitive data. It's necessary for users all across the world, not only employees and contractors that we have direct control over, but really to embrace, the full speed of business, we've got to partner with our contractors and other types of organizations that need access to our internal applications and data from a variety of places, locations, devices, including personal devices, and that creates significant challenges for us on the IT security side. And while many organizations are headed down the right path in terms of protecting access to sensitive data stored in applications and databases, when we get out and talk to customers, we find that most are woefully unprotected when it comes to sensitive unstructured data stored in files throughout the enterprise. When you stop to consider that almost 80% of any organization's data is unstructured, you can see the scope of the problem we're dealing with. In just a few years, we've gone from a situation where most of the sensitive data was safely locked behind an application or in a database, and we had the right access controls in place from an IAM perspective, to a situation today where the growth of all types of data has exploded and we expect it to continue exploding to the degree of almost 800% growth in just the next 3 years. So think about how you work on a daily basis. Most of us create files as part of just operating in our traditional roles. Think about how many files you create, you save, you modify, you delete, or you share every day. And it's not uncommon for the information to be moved from a structured system to an unstructured system, like moving from an ERP where you might have financial data into Excel, PowerPoint, PDF, Word documents. I talk to a lot of customers that think about a board of director presentation and the information required to report on maybe a quarterly financial performance. And the reality is you may export that from your ERP and then create multiple files that you're going to end up storing in different locations. And those files are probably going to be sent not only inside of the enterprise, but outside via email. And without the right protections in place, sensitive data that you've worked very hard to protect inside the ERP can quickly become exposed. And we shouldn't just be worried about attacks from the outside. I think a lot of IT professionals, and especially when you talk to boards of directors, tend to think that the attacks are generally coming from outsiders trying to get in, causing data breaches. But in fact, almost half of the breaches today are caused by insiders using access granted to them by the organization for a particular purpose. And compounding this problem is the reality that it can take almost 200 days to detect that a breach has occurred. And so when you put both of these things together, the majority, a large percentage of breaches being caused by insiders and a long time to detect a breach, you can see that over a relatively significant period, it's very easy for either insiders or outsiders to cause significant organizational harm. Could be financial, could be reputational. In most cases, it's going to be both. These facts are real and the concerns are valid. The world has fundamentally changed as we know it, and the way that we work has changed and eliminated the single entry point to defend. So businesses today must operate in real time. You have to be ready to address the concerns, not only from a security and risk perspective, but also from a regulatory compliance perspective. Almost every industry, and some more so than others, have the realities of all three of these areas that they have to manage. And whether you're an executive, whether you're an IT professional, whether you're a business user, we all have to be focused on managing the risks, and they all demand our attention in a way that we can't forget that on one hand, we have to focus on securing access to information, whether it's data inside in our data center, whether it's data that we've decided to move out to the cloud. But we also have to balance the reality of what we're trying to accomplish as a business. And so the challenge that we face as professionals in this area is balancing that security and the growth of our business and collaboration that's required to achieve that. So if we look at the top 3 reasons companies are fundamentally unprepared, these are risks that we see every day at SailPoint. Over the past several years, we've helped customers eliminate these 3 issues, and really by taking a very comprehensive approach to the challenges that are posed by a changing threat landscape, especially as it relates to managing unstructured data. So our SailPoint solutions are designed to improve visibility, to align access with business need, and provide a strong foundation for governing access throughout a user's lifecycle with the business. So to add to this discussion, let me turn things over to Josh, our guest speaker from Cargill, to outline some of the challenges they experience in managing access to unstructured data and how they've overcome each. Josh?
Thanks, Paul. So my name is Josh Bovee. Just want to give a quick introduction to Cargill. We're a company that provides food, agricultural, financial, and industrial products and services worldwide. We recently celebrated our 150th anniversary. We have 150,000 employees globally. We operate in 70 countries, and of course, we operate in a heavily regulated industry. Recently, or about 18 months ago, the CISO came to us and wanted to get a better understanding of our unstructured data position in Cargill. We know, based on operational metrics, that we do have some challenges with people having the wrong access, and we needed a way to address it. In order to address it, we started with a very manual script-based approach, but that wasn't going to scale across the organization. We needed a way that could give us more visibility that was actionable so that we could actually change the state and not just know more about the problem. This technology, as in many of the companies, for people that are on this call, file services and unstructured data has grown up over years. Lots of manual processes at Cargill deal with that, as well as some legacy solutions that attempted to automate the problem, but still required humans to make decisions that are very error-prone. So our goal was to address the wild, wild west of data storage and leverage investments we've made in SailPoint Technologies to have an integrated solution that enables the business to manage their data in a way that's appropriate for them and how they do business. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Paul Gherkin to describe how we did that in Cargill.
All right. Well, thank you, Josh, and thank you, Paul. So as you see on the screen, right, the framework of how we went about trying to solve this particular problem was, first you've got to find a way to detect and understand what the problem is. Once you've done some of that work, you can go into reporting on the things that you've detected, then bring that into a discussion with your business to sort of understand what the real issues are and how you might be able to partner together to solve that particular problem. And then we get to the remediation stage where it's basically lather, rinse, repeat, and I'll take you through that now. So just to give you an overview, I guess, of where Cargill stands with Security IQ today, we've got roughly 400 Windows and NetApp file servers that are integrated into the solution. Our on-premises SharePoint environment is also in there, along obviously with Active Directory. We are gathering permissions data and crawling those sources just to get a sense for who has access where, and we're also gathering activity data from all of those sources as well. We are doing some targeted uses of the data classification elements of the product, but that's been kind of a thing that we've put a little bit on the back burner for now, just to sort of get the data access governance under control. So our real challenge was to find a solution that would work with our deep file structures and our multiple unique points of permission. So with that, we'll get into detection here. So as Josh alluded to, right, we had kicked this off with just trying to understand where we had data, how much exposure there was for that particular set of data, and knowing very quickly that that wasn't going to scale to the level that we needed to make something that was easily understood by the business. We needed a tool that could detect those vulnerable points of permission, monitor those activities, automate the request and provisioning processes, replace those legacy tools, replace the manual decision-making processes, something that would work with our Identity IQ implementation, and hopefully get us to a standpoint where we would eliminate the unauthorized changes to our file structure. So initially, right, I started off with a discussion amongst the rest of our technology governance, risk and control organization. We've got a lot of good people that are doing a lot of good work around where we have data, what the challenges are in, being audited against who has access to that data. So just basically a lot of data gathering internally, and I guess unsurprisingly, right, our issues ranged from just improper access, overexposed access, an inability for us to reliably pass audits, unable to determine how someone gained access, when they gained access, just a lot of different ingress and egresses to how somebody might gain access to a file system. And it seemed like we were in this perpetual tug of war between the business and IT, where we had the sort of hot potato of whose job is it really to protect the access to data. So that set the stage for us to discover where sensitive data resides, locate those over-permissioned users and the nested groups that are giving access to our folder structures, and then take that data and use that to both extract who a particular data owner might be and give them some relevant information that they can take action on to hopefully make our situation a little bit better. Oh, I might have jumped ahead a little bit. Sorry about that. We'll move on here. So we use the product just to basically gather data on a set of file servers that we kind of knew internally, took that data, sort of managed it, massaged it a little bit to sort of identify what things we had in our environment, and it didn't take long really to see what our sort of problems were. So, but throughout the discovery process, right, we had hoped to be able to assess user access activities, share that data with business owners, and then identify gaps that we could address within the product. So those initial scans basically told us the things that we expected to see, but we'd hoped that we wouldn't. Overexposed permissions, so permissions to very large groups, including everyone, domain users, and we've got several other groups that have hundreds or thousands of users within them that certainly causes us a problem. We found that we've got multiple groups that are set on a particular folder that have the same permissions. So we might have 2 or 3 groups that have modified permissions on a folder structure. Groups with nested memberships, which obviously is a very alarming cause of concern for us, just because you don't necessarily know that if you're certifying membership of one group, you might see the users of just that group, but you don't see everybody else. So we've got a bit of a blind spot there. Direct permissions for users, again, a problem that seemed to be pretty pervasive. Our legacy support groups having full control permissions to data, and even in the administrators group of the file servers themselves, so they could take a lot of action. And again, users with multiple permission paths to the same data. I think the high watermark, as I've seen to this point, was one particular user that had access to a folder through 5 different means, either direct groups, nested groups, even direct permissions. So being able to report on that type of activity or that that level of exposure certainly helps us out. So as a result of scanning those devices, we had a capability that allowed us to share useful data with our business partners on not only who has access to their data, but at what level. And in addition, we could monitor those activities to ensure future compliance. So once we had some good data, right, the next step was to ensure that we had some buy-in between the business and IT, define exactly what the process would look like for identifying business owners, and then establish a governance model that we could leverage Security IQ along with our existing Identity IQ implementation to take us forward. So once we had good data, right, I needed a willing participant to come along on the journey with us and be sort of the guinea pig for the remainder of Cargill businesses to take this forward. Luckily for us, we had somebody that had recently come up basically about the time that we had started things, and they were challenged with basically getting their unstructured data under control for their particular business. Cargill calls them BRMs, which is a business relationship manager. Functionally, a business relationship manager is just a conduit between IT and the business. They speak fluent geek, and they also speak fluent business. So they're very valuable for us as an IT organization, that we can use our geeky terms, and hopefully the folks on the other end, they can interpret what things we're trying to say, which certainly helps us out. So those discussions with that business relationship manager were basically just around, tell me your story of where we fall down, what challenges you have, and again, pretty much the same themes of we've got legacy tools that are driving access requests. Today, a user basically needs to know the folder name or share path that they want to request access to, and today, if that particular folder path is not within the tool, it then goes down a manual track, and even if it is in the tool, it will kick off appropriate governance around that. But again, it's a legacy tool for us that was built, for purpose, but we'd like to see get converted into our enterprise tools like Identity IQ. We also had a legacy tool for certifications of group memberships. Again, something that was purpose-built specifically for file and folder access. It doesn't understand nested group memberships. So that obviously gives us a blind spot that if we're asking a business partner to certify the membership of a particular Active Directory group, what they see is a representation of who has access, but what they don't see is all of the other people that have access through some other means or some other group that they've not been asked to certify. The group names that control access to our data are very IT-centric in nature. As a IT professional, I sort of have the decoder ring as to how they are architected and how they might, where they are being used. From a business level, it's a bunch of characters and squiggly lines that if you're around long enough, you might understand it, but at the same time, it's difficult for the business to sort of understand what those things mean and where they might be in place. And lastly, just as I mentioned before, right, we've got delegated administrators that have come along throughout the journey and have kept access for a very long time, so they have access to modify the data or modify groups on the server, give people direct access, all sorts of things that that lead to us being in a vulnerable position. So as a result of all of that discussion, right, what we tried to sort of formulate is how can we fix this, right? We basically had two options, right? And the discussion sort of centered on how could we clean this up in place with the existing groups, existing processes, or was there something within the tool that would allow us to take better control of our situation? And ultimately, as we get into remediation here, right, for Cargill, right, our recipe for success includes normalizing permissions using the normalization feature within Security IQ. That allows us to do some self-service compliance reporting for business owners, and lastly, the business owners being empowered to ensure security of their data. And all of that's happening, basically as a result of Security IQ. So having come to that conclusion personally that normalization was our best path forward, I reached out to that business partner and said, look, I've got a crazy idea here, and I know it will mean some change for you, but I think it's change for the right reason. So with that, I had explained that the group names and descriptions using the normalization feature are based on a template that allows us to create business-friendly names of the groups and descriptions of those groups. We could then create those groups in a secured organizational unit or OU in Active Directory. We could then use Security IQ to monitor for changes to those groups, that if a change came from something outside of an expected place, we can alert on that activity and we can take appropriate steps from there. In addition, the normalization feature removes the nesting that's caused us so much harm in the past. It removes those direct points of permission that a user might have and basically provides a single path of permissions to business data. So we've got one group for full control, one group for modify access, and one group for read-only access. And it's very straightforward. So instead of seeing the spider web of permissions that a user might have, we've got just a nice direct path that, group, user to group to permission. So after twisting some arms, right, we got that done and, staged a test, made sure that normalization acted the way that we wanted to. And as a part of that, as an added bonus, I basically set up our business relationship manager as a data owner within the tool to sort of just gauge their interest as to what the business user interface component of the product can do. And to be quite frank with you, I sort of assume that a Cargill person may or may not be too excited about the business user interface. It provides, I thought meaningful data, but I wasn't quite sure how it would be received from the business side. Happy to report that they are eating it up with a spoon. They love it. I mean, it allows for them to see things that IT had either purposely hidden from them or just sort of were not something that we thought had meaningful value to share with the business. But it's been very well received, and looking forward to getting that out to more people to allow them to be their own advocate for taking control of data access governance for their business. After going through the normalization and just looking at comparing the snapshots of the before and the after of permissions, I think we were both floored at just how simple things now looked compared to what they did. I mean, it was just eye-opening for us to see that, oh, well, great, now I know everybody who has access, how they have access, so now we can undertake a certification approach and take out those people that don't need to retain that access. So long story short, right, our process is essentially now we just, we pick a folder that we want to take action on, look at the before permissions, decide if there's any changes that are warranted because of, you know, overexposed permissions or the potential that we might be able to move some of those permissions higher in the tree. Looking, you know, down below, we might find there's some uninherited permissions, but we've got the same people that have access all the way through that folder structure, so it might be more appropriate to do permissions at a higher level. We find appropriate owners to maintain the groups and go through the certification processes for those groups, and we schedule and run the normalization. Once all of that is done, we link up those newly created groups in Identity IQ and then perform those certifications on the membership of those groups. We've gone through a pretty good set of the devices that were affecting this particular business partner. I've gotten, you know, great feedback from not only that person, but they've shared their experience with other business relationship managers. So we've actually fanned out to a few other businesses as well, including our own audit team. So I think that'll be great to have them on board as a selling point to tell people that, well, we're using this ourselves. It might be a vehicle for you to get your data under control and start selling that for us. But you know, end result basically is we've taken something that was very tedious, very manual, very difficult for the business and IT to sort of partner on and get together on, and we've created something that allows the business to be in a position where they can take action, right? They can now see things, they can advocate for themselves, and I think we've done a great job at trying to get the business's buy-in, the business approach, and create something that's meaningful for them. As I've told everybody at Cargill along the way, right, if we're going through this process and we're not doing it for the business, or they have concerns about the way that we're doing it, we're probably doing it wrong. If we don't have the buy-in from the business, this initiative doesn't go anywhere. And you know, feedback's been very, very positive, and we're basically at the timeline of getting a formal project kicked off through our hosting organization to part and parcel rip and replace permissions as they stand today to something where Security IQ is basically the sun in that universe. So I'll just go through these, right? So I kind of already touched on these. I didn't advance the slides. I'm sorry about that. But you know, again, right, we've got, you know, the business able to, you know, do things on their timeline as opposed to having to burden IT with, can you get me a report of all of the people that have access to this? You know, they're either doing some, you know, merger, acquisition, divestiture activities. There may be some audit activities that they need to be, you know, in front of. The end result is we'll end up with decreased IT effort and cost, and even from the business side, right, where we're taking a lot of those manual things out, where today our approach is you go scan a server, you go decide what to fix, you go fix those things, and now we're creating a capability where we can manage that process end to end, which hopefully will put us in a much better compliance and audit ready state. So with that, I think I will kick it back over to To the other Paul.
Thanks, Paul. It's fun to have multiple Pauls on the same call and try to keep everybody straight. But I appreciate the perspective that you and Josh have added to the conversation. You highlighted a number of things that I actually want to go back and kind of focus on as it relates to Security IQ. Being that Security IQ is a newer product for SailPoint, and most, I think, of our customers, really understand the identity governance part of our business. But Security IQ has brought an added dimension to the capabilities that we can deliver to the enterprise around how we can, assist in securing and managing risk associated with access to unstructured data. So why don't we jump in and take a look at Security IQ in a little bit more detail. At the highest level, Security IQ is designed to enable organizations to protect their valuable data that is generally stored outside of structured application and databases and directories and things that traditional identity management products might have been focused on. And importantly, especially in today's enterprise that is generally hybrid, it does this both for files inside the network as well as files that are being stored in cloud storage systems, such as Box or something like OneDrive. In order to stay competitive, organizations, have to figure out ways to both protect the information that they're creating, but also to continue to focus on their core business. And to do that and move your company forward at the same time, you really have to open your perimeter in a way that we just have to get past the uncomfort. And in doing that, enable and empower your end users to drive your business. So the question is, how do you do this with all of the constraints and risks that are generally forced upon us from a compliance perspective? Because we have to do this in a way that protects the business, but still does it in a way that we can, give you tools that will help you discover, that will help you empower, and ultimately help you optimize the data inside your organization, exactly like Paul was just discussing. And it's something that you have to do from an IT perspective by partnering with the business. And when you do this by bringing the collaboration of IT and business together, you can actually create a very secure and confident environment that will allow your business to continue to collaborate and maybe even increase collaboration, but do it in a way that the data is ultimately protected. So let's dig into each of these three areas in just a little bit more depth. On the discovery side, one of the key things is understanding where your sensitive data is stored. Many organizations that I talk to don't have a good handle on this. And part of the reason is the explosion of unstructured data in general. The second issue is the number of places that files can ultimately be stored, right? We talk to a lot of customers that are big Microsoft SharePoint organizations that want those collaborative, type of portal environments. But SharePoint gives a lot of power to the end users in terms of how sites are created, how sites are managed, who's granted access to them, what type of data is stored. And so it's a perfect example of just how challenging it can be to really understand where your data is. So first and foremost, we have to start off by finding the data so that we can really understand what we need to manage. The second piece then is going in and understanding how access is being granted to it. And I thought Paul gave a good example of the use case where they went and looked at a particular user and how they were being granted access to a file share folder, and there were 5 different group memberships that were ultimately granting that access. Well, that makes it very challenging from a compliance perspective if I'm that person's manager and I say, gosh, I don't think Bob, in this case, needs to have access, and so therefore I'm going to revoke access to this one group, not recognizing that I'm not really going to change the ultimate access that Bob has, because he's still going to inherit the ability to gain access to that through several other group memberships. So we've really got to simplify the model so that there's a much easier way for the business to understand how people are being granted access and for IT to manage that access over a long period of time. The next piece that's really critical and something that I think a lot of organizations overlook is this isn't an IT problem. You can't solve the protection of data solely by asking your IT department to do more or try harder. You have to go out and figure out who in the business is going to take ownership over the data. It doesn't necessarily mean every file has to have an owner, but what it means is the higher level containers need to have some structure and need to have some ownership to provide that data steward. So it could be a folder on a file share, it could be a file share in general, it could be, a SharePoint site, but whatever the right level of granularity is, you need to push that out into the business and make sure that people understand that as data is getting created, they have to take ownership over who has access to it, and then the data itself as part of that process. And then finally, on the discovery side, one of the things that we always want to understand is who's actually using the data. And we want this for a couple of reasons. One, understanding user activity gives us a baseline for what's normal and what's not normal in terms of frequency of data access, or maybe even the hours that somebody is generally going to be looking at information. And then it gives us the ability down the road to set policies so that we understand when anomalies are happening. The other thing that is very important about activity data is it helps us find dormant accounts and data. So it allows the data owner to go in and understand that people are no longer using a particular file or maybe accessing a particular folder, and so that's a good opportunity to maybe take that offline, save them storage costs, reduce risk. At the same time, if I have people that just aren't using particular accounts, I can go in and eliminate those accounts. And again, I'm potentially taking away a cost associated with granting access to a particular thing that maybe is chargeable on a per user basis. And I'm also then removing, the likelihood that somebody could use that dormant account in a malicious way, either an insider or somebody from the outside. So next, let's take a look at how we empower business users. First, we come back to the data ownership, and we want to give the data owners in particular very intuitive and actionable dashboards, because what that allows them to do is get a very quick view into the information that they're being asked to oversee. Could be, just a snapshot of a particular file and how, frequently it's been accessed. Could be a snapshot of, over permission files that they are being, asked to oversee. But effectively, when we take a look on this next screenshot, just an easy snapshot view on exactly the information that they need to know in order to do their jobs as a data owner. And this is just an interesting example where I can show you very quickly, that this person is managing some resources that are overexposed. And in those overexposed resources, there are a number of things that they could go do to improve the risk level of that access. You can also see users with stale permissions. And in a large organization, if we only had 123 people with stale permissions, that's probably not a huge risk. If 90% of the population had access that was ultimately stale, then I would want to go in and begin to clean that up. So the dashboard just gives us a great way to, focus our controls and get a better view of what we're trying to accomplish. The next thing that we want to look at, is users, excuse me, that we want to give users the ability to work the way that they like to work. And so in this day and age, you can't assume that in order to interact with a system, whether it's an identity governance, a data access governance system, that every user is going to necessarily be sitting in front of a desktop or a laptop computer. And so one of the things that Security IQ focuses on is delivering a lot of these capabilities, out to somebody so that they can be walking around with a tablet and they can still see, the information and have the data at their fingertips to continue to manage that, even when they're, remote or not necessarily, at their desk. Then the next area that we want to focus on is access requests and access reviews, right? Because we want to empower end users to manage access. And one of the ways that we do that, and it's a very typical process that we see even on the identity governance side, is we want to create interfaces and we want to create processes that really allow the end users to go through the ad hoc request. I need access to something I don't have. I'm on a new project, for example. And then the managers to go through a process of reviewing access on a regular basis. And so Security IQ gives you those capabilities to make that a very intuitive and easy process for the business. Then the next area is defining those policies and those alert opportunities when we see things that are happening in the system that are fundamentally out of bounds. And it's very easy in Security IQ to define baseline activity policies and then alert or take action when something is happening that is anomalous against what is intended. So it could be that on a regular basis, people don't typically access this file share outside of normal business hours or on the weekend. And all of a sudden the system detects significant activity that could be somebody creating that initial breach. And when we think back to that 200-day example of how long, the average time it takes to detect a breach, even the ability to, on the outset, at the very earliest stages, have an alert that is triggered so somebody can go follow up on it, it gives you the opportunity to shrink that time drastically and really minimize the impact to the organization. And so finally, the last piece on the empowering business users is providing identity context enrichment. So what we can do through the integration of the Identity IQ system with Security IQ is we can actually bring in that rich identity data that we have in Identity IQ and use that to improve the application of controls and the application of policies and the assessment of risk in the context of managing access to unstructured data through Security IQ. So very synergistic in terms of how we bring those two things together. So now we turn our attention to how we can optimize things from a business perspective. And one of the first thing that we really want to look at is how we can, start with the automated execution of access policies. And so, the ability to let the system determine dynamically based on what's happening, whether I want to trigger an event to stop potential malicious behavior or whether I just want to log it for follow-up. It gives us a lot of control and provides that security operations, type of person or role, the ability to really see deeply within the system what's happening and then take immediate action. The next area is around just reporting. Security IQ comes with a variety of reporting templates that makes it very easy to ask common questions and get immediate results so that you have a better understanding of what's happening within your unstructured data environment. It will give you information that is compliance relevant, so things that you can use for proof of compliance in your audit processes. But importantly, it also gives you those security and risk management reports in terms of frequently accessed data, areas where you may have over-permissioned access to particular areas where data is incredibly sensitive, and just a general perspective on what's happening in the environment. Next, we also allow you to share Security IQ events with SIM or SIM information into Security IQ, again, to create that enrichment. And this just gives you more information and better visibility across different activities so that you can try to find those areas that may have slipped through the cracks in a more manual-based approach. And finally, when we look at how we integrate the data access governance solution with Identity IQ, this gives you the ability to have an end-to-end solution so that you can truly protect everything in the organization in a very comprehensive way. So if we think about SailPoint at a broader level and Security IQ in particular, we really take a unique perspective on the challenges that we discussed today. Our goal is to help enterprises across the world put identity governance at the center of your security and enterprise identity and access management programs, because we think with the significant changes taking place in how businesses operate, there's more data being created, it's stored in more places, it's accessed by more people. It's more important now than ever to have a strong identity governance program that ultimately gives you control over who has access to what and what can be done with that access. And we believe there are three key requirements to securing the enterprise, and Security IQ, as well as all of our products, are fundamentally built on these three principles. The first one is see everything. We believe that the identity and data access governance solutions must be able to connect to all enterprise systems. So whether it's enterprise systems that are running in your data center, your file shares, your network attached storage devices, or in a lot of organizations, the things that are now out on the cloud, your OneDrive environment, SharePoint Online, even if you're using a full Office 365 complement and you're running email externally. We want you to bring all of those things together so you can see everything as it relates to what people have access to, coupling your structured and your unstructured systems together, your on-prem and your cloud, for that holistic view. The second piece then is governing everything. You need to know who should have access, who does have access, and then what users are doing with the access to their applications and data in order to truly protect the enterprise from malicious activity. And so this requires the ability to define a standard or a desired state and continually assess where access is not aligned, and then proactively control the deltas in that environment. And that is, whether it's controls like access request in terms of requesting and granting new access, whether it's lifecycle controls around granting access as people join, move, or leave the organization, or whether it's something like an access certification program that just allows you to go back and on a periodic basis make sure access does align with job function of a particular user in a particular role. All of these things give you that ability to govern everything. And finally, the empowerment message is very important, right? In this day and age, you have to let users work how they like to work. You can't necessarily completely change the way that an organization works solely on the basis of enterprise and data security. However, users are an important aspect of being successful in your security and risk management programs. And so when you can align the way in which you manage access and govern access to the way that people work, you can really create a safe environment for people to increase collaboration both inside and outside of your network. And so if you take these things, in context and really think of them comprehensively, Security IQ as well as the broader SailPoint portfolio gives you a lot of power in terms of how you manage these things. So I want to extend a sincere thank you to my guests today, Josh and Paul from Cargill. I thought they did a great job of helping to paint a picture of the challenges that they were facing as they embarked on this journey. And importantly, a lot of the key things that they were able to accomplish very, very quickly to improve security, but also empower their business at the same time. So with that, let me turn things back over to Shay for the Q&A portion of today's webinar.
Great, thank you, Paul. Okay, we've just got a few minutes for Q&A, so let's jump in. Our first question, this is directed at Cargill. So what was one of the main organizational challenges you experienced as you've been rolling this out?
Well, surprisingly, I think I found more resistance from an IT standpoint than I have from a business standpoint, just because of the nature of what's going to have to change from an IT perspective. But at the same time, they seem to be embracing it. It's just trying to get both of those sides to understand that we're doing this with the business, for the business, and having to make it something that's intuitive for the business is going to pay far more dividends than processes that we take on today. But the response has been overwhelmingly positive from the business side. It's just ironing out how we take on the challenge of securing the remainder of our resources that we've got to secure.
Great. Okay, next question. This will be at Cargill as well. What kind of cloud applications are you using to store your unstructured data?
So SharePoint and OneDrive are a large part of our cloud-based unstructured data storage strategy, but as with many companies on the call, I'm sure you've noticed that we also have Dropbox and many of the other competitors as well that come into play. Right now, since this is such a large problem, our primary focus is on our strategic initiatives around the legacy file servers, which will be around for a long time, but then moving into OneDrive and SharePoint specifically for Office 365.
Great. Okay. What was your strategy to get the business participation to this exercise?
Strangely enough, that was a lot more easy than I expected it to be. The strategy basically was get one person hooked on it, and from there they kind of fanned out to a bunch of other business relationship managers that have come to me as opposed to having to go to them. So I like the consumption model of them wanting it and coming to us for it. I didn't know how we were going to do that, but thankfully it just kind of fell into a very easy model of getting the business hooked on it.
Okay, great. Paul Trula, this next one might be a good one for you. There are many definitions in the business for unstructured data. How would you define it?
I think for the purposes of what we're focused on today, unstructured data is data that's stored in files. And it's generally data that's created and, ultimately owned and managed by business users. So things like Excel spreadsheets, Word documents, PDF files, but even things, in the media realm could be viewed as unstructured. So an MP3 file, a video file, maybe a recording of a company, presentation of sensitive financial information, needs to be managed with the same sensitivity, as the financial data that was, used to originally create the presentation. So, it's a fairly broad definition, and each organization, has to understand what kind of data is generally created outside of the structured applications and databases, and then put proactive controls in to manage the information.
Okay, great. Thank you, Paul. Okay, this next one's for Cargill. So how did you sell this to the C-suite?
So they're well aware of the logical access issues that have happened around unstructured data through audit reporting. And the way to get them on board is to make sure we define the problem simply, right? This is a large problem. We're not going to boil the ocean. So we defined the problem simply and demonstrated incremental improvement in an approach that's lather, rinse, repeat. And that strategy of continuous incremental improvement and being able to demonstrate that with our pilot efforts is how we got the C-level folks on board.
Got it. Okay, next question for Cargill as well. How did the business and users manage nested permissions? What was the remediation path? Did you create additional shares, etc.?
To this point, I'd say the management is a little bit haphazard, right? There may be some people that own particular groups or have delegated access with an Active Directory to manage those groups. So some of that happens directly, some of it happens indirectly, whether it's on purpose or by accident that they're adding the right or wrong people to the right or wrong groups, right? The remediation path was essentially using the normalization feature to sort of remove that out of our environment just because of the different methods at which somebody could take action on any of those particular nested groups. So we kind of take that out of it, put the security in a place where it's in a protected OU where we can protect those groups, monitor those groups with Security IQ. So that sort of remediates all of that other noise and all those other ingress points for managing those groups.
Excellent. Okay, that is all the time that we have for questions today. Thank you everyone for joining us. If you'd like to learn more, next Tuesday on February 14th at 10 a.m. Central, we have a live demo of Security IQ. You can see it in action. Also, we will be sending a link to today's recording of today's event tomorrow, so keep an eye out from an email from us. Thanks everyone who joined us today. Thank you, Cargill, and thank you, Paul Truelove. We hope you all have a great rest of your day.